Nathan Carter stared out the window as the bus rumbled down the winding road, leaving behind the last traces of civilization. His reflection flickered in the glass, distorted by the trees blurring past under the fading evening light. The sky was overcast, casting a dull, grayish hue over everything. Blackwood was nothing like the city he had left behind. His mom had called this move a fresh start. A quiet town, a good school, a safe place, she had assured him. But Nathan knew better. He had moved enough times to understand that fresh starts don't exist when you look like him in a town like this. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so you won't miss out on more thrilling stories. Drop a comment below with your thoughts and share this story with those who need to hear it. Turn on the notification bell to stay updated with our latest videos. See you in the next exciting and meaningful story. As the bus pulled into Blackwood High, the sense of unease that had been lingering at the edge of his mind tightened its grip on his chest. The school loomed ahead, an old, Gothic-style building, its brick walls darkened by time and weather. It looked more like an abandoned asylum than a school. The air felt heavy, thick with something unseen. The moment Nathan stepped off the bus, he felt it. The shift in energy, the weight of eyes on him, the silence that wasn't quite silent. Students were scattered across the courtyard, chatting in groups, shuffling through their lockers, but the second he walked past, conversations dropped to hushed whispers. A few students turned to look at him, but their gazes lingered a second too long, their expressions unreadable, some curious, some wary, something else, like recognition. Nathan swallowed hard. How could they recognize him? He had never been here before. A chill ran down his spine, but he forced himself to keep moving. Inside, the feeling only got worse. The hallways were long, narrow, and dimly lit, the fluorescent lights overhead buzzing softly, casting an unnatural glow. The lockers were old, some dented, some covered in deep scratches. The air smelled faintly of dust and something else, something stale, like a place that had been closed off for too long. Nathan spotted a group of teachers standing near the main office. Their conversation halted the second they noticed him. One of them, a woman with sharp eyes and too much perfume, forced a smile, too wide, too tight. "You must be Nathan Carter," she said, her voice a little too polite, a little too careful, like she was choosing her words as if they could break, like she was afraid. Nathan nodded. "Yeah." She exchanged a quick glance with the other teachers before gesturing down the hall. "Welcome to Blackwood. Let's get you to class." As he followed her through the corridors, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The whispers, the stares, the way people moved aside a little too quickly as he walked past. It wasn't just that he was new. It was like they had been expecting him. The first few classes went by without much trouble, but the unease never left. The teachers were all the same, too polite, too measured, watching him just a little too closely. Some of the students whispered behind his back, but every time he turned around, they fell silent. Then there was Ryan Mitchell. Nathan noticed him in third period. Tall, broad shoulders, blonde hair that was just a little too perfect, and a presence that demanded attention. The kind of guy who owned the school without needing to say a word. Ryan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes locked on Nathan with an expression that wasn't quite a smirk, but wasn't friendly either. Nathan knew that look, sizing him up. By the time lunch rolled around, the feeling of being watched had settled deep in his bones, an itch beneath his skin that refused to go away. He grabbed his tray and scanned the cafeteria. Most tables were already full, groups sealed off like unspoken territories. A few students whispered and exchanged glances, some shaking their heads subtly, as if warning him not to sit near them. Then he saw an empty seat near a guy who seemed too busy scrolling through his phone to care. It wasn't ideal, but it was something. Nathan had barely set his tray down when a voice cut through the noise. "You lost?" He turned. Ryan Mitchell sat a few tables away, his gaze locked onto him, a slow smirk stretching across his face. The students around him watched, waiting. Nathan exhaled slowly, keeping his expression unreadable. Didn't know I needed a map. Ryan chuckled, shaking his head. Just making sure. Not a lot of new faces around here. Nathan caught the hesitation in his voice, the unspoken part of that sentence. He met Ryan's stare, his face blank. Guess I'm the exception. The smirk widened, but behind it, there was something else. Not just amusement, not just curiosity. Something darker. Ryan nodded slowly. Welcome to Blackwood, Carter. Nathan didn't respond. He just sat down, picked up his fork, and started eating. But he knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning. At first, it was just whispers. Nathan would walk down the hallway, and somewhere behind him, voices would murmur just loud enough for him to hear, but never clear enough to understand. Words just on the edge of recognition, slipping away before he could catch them. The few times he turned around, the hall would be normal. Students talking, laughing, stuffing books into their lockers. Nothing out of place, except for that feeling. That itch at the back of his neck, the heavy presence of unseen eyes tracking his every move. It wasn't just paranoia. He knew what it felt like to be watched. Then the accident started. The first time it happened at his locker. Nathan was swapping out his books when a sudden force slammed into his back, shoving him forward. His shoulder hit the cold metal hard, the sound echoing down the hall. Oops, a voice behind him drawled. Nathan clenched his jaw, already knowing who it was before he turned. Ryan Mitchell. The blonde-haired quarterback leaned casually against the row of lockers, his smirk lazy, eyes full of amusement. Behind him, his usual group, Nick, Kyle, and a few others, watched with quiet anticipation. Nathan exhaled through his nose, refusing to react. He grabbed his notebook and shut his locker slowly, making sure his movements were controlled. Ryan grinned wider. You're quiet, huh? That's cool. Real cool. Nathan didn't respond. He had played this game before. Give them nothing, and eventually they'd get bored. Except Ryan wasn't the kind to get bored easily. The second time, it was in the cafeteria. Nathan was heading toward the trash cans when, suddenly, a foot shot out in front of him. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't meant to be. His body jerked forward, his tray tipping, but he caught himself just in time. The room went silent for a half-second, then a few chuckles rippled through the crowd. Ryan held up his hands in mock innocence. Relax, man. It was a joke. Nathan straightened, gripping the tray tightly. Don't react. Don't give him what he wants. He stepped over Ryan's foot and kept walking. Behind him, laughter. Someone muttered, too easy. But the third time wasn't just a joke. Nathan had stayed late in the library. Most of the students had already gone home and the school was eerily quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. As he stepped into the empty hallway, he heard it. Footsteps. Too deliberate. Too steady. Following him. Nathan's breath slowed. He glanced at the darkened windows lining the hall, but the reflection showed only him. No one else. Still, the footsteps didn't stop. He turned a corner, and suddenly, something smacked against his back, hard. A sharp, cold impact. He staggered, his breath hitching. Ice cubes clattered to the floor, liquid soaking through his hoodie. Laughter. Nathan turned slowly. Ryan stood there, an empty cup still in his hand, grinning. Damn, my bad, Ryan said, not even trying to sound apologetic. Didn't see you there. Nathan's hoodie was soaked, the sickly sweet scent of soda clinging to him. Around them, a few students had stopped to watch. Some whispering, some waiting. The weight in his chest grew heavier. Ryan smirked, stepping closer. Come on, man, say something. Nathan didn't. He just started to walk past him, and that's when Ryan shoved him. Not a playful push, not a joke. It was hard, intentional. Nathan stumbled back a step. The hallway went silent. His breath was calm, but his fingers twitched at his sides. Ryan laughed. What? You scared? Nick stepped forward, grinning. Nah, man, he's just soft. Nathan could hear his uncle's voice in his head. A lion doesn't flinch when the hyenas bark. He exhaled. Let it go. Nathan turned slowly. Ryan stood there, an empty cup still in his hand, grinning. Damn, my bad, Ryan said, not even trying to sound apologetic. Didn't see you there. Nathan's hoodie was soaked, the sickly sweet scent of soda clinging to him. Around them, a few students had stopped to watch, some whispering, some waiting. The weight in his chest grew heavier. Ryan smirked, stepping closer. Come on, man, say something. Nathan didn't. He just started to walk past him, and that's when Ryan shoved him. Not a playful push, not a joke. It was hard. Intentional. Nathan stumbled back a step. The hallway went silent. His breath was calm, but his fingers twitched at his sides. Ryan laughed. What? You scared? Nick stepped forward, grinning. Nah, man, he's just soft. Nathan could hear his uncle's voice in his head. A lion doesn't flinch when the hyenas bark. He exhaled. Let it go. But Nathan wasn't done. He pivoted, bringing up an uppercut with perfect form. Ryan's head snapped back. For a second, he tried to stay on his feet. Then his legs gave out, and he hit the floor. Hard. Silence. Nick and the others stared. Nathan stepped back, adjusting his hoodie. His breath steady, his heartbeat slow. Ryan groaned, rolling onto his side, coughing. Nathan looked down at him and finally spoke. You done? Ryan didn't answer. Nathan glanced at the others. Anyone else? No one moved. Nathan grabbed his backpack, slung it over his shoulder, and walked away. But he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. The next morning, the entire school knew. Nathan didn't need to check his phone or hear the whispers to figure that out. The way people looked at him told him everything. The stares weren't just curiosity anymore. Some were impressed, some were nervous. A few looked at him like they were seeing him for the first time. One thing was clear. He wasn't just the new kid anymore. Ryan wasn't in school. That part didn't surprise him. Taking a hit like that in front of half the parking lot wasn't something you bounced back from overnight. Nick and Kyle? They kept their distance. No smug remarks, no smirks. But that didn't mean people were done talking. As Nathan moved through the cafeteria, conversations quieted when he passed. People whispered. Some nodded at him like they suddenly respected him. Freshman kids who hadn't even spoken to him before acted like he was some kind of legend. And then there were the others. Didn't know new guy had hands, someone muttered as he walked by. Ryan had it coming, another voice added. Heard he's not coming back for a week. Nathan ignored it. He wasn't here to be a hero. He wasn't looking for validation. Then, as he sat down, he heard something else. He's just another violent thug. The words were soft, but not soft enough. Nathan turned his head slightly, just enough to see where it had come from. A couple of girls at a nearby table. One of them, a brunette with expensive-looking jewelry and an expression like she smelled something bad, quickly looked away when she realized he'd hurt her. His stomach clenched. That was the thing about moments like these. No matter how justified you were, no matter how right the situation felt, someone always found a way to twist it. But Nathan didn't regret it. Ryan had gone looking for a fight. Nathan just made sure he got one. Still, the weight of it all sat on him. He had spent years training, years controlling himself, years walking away. That wasn't weakness. That was strength. So why did it feel like no matter what choice he made, people had already decided who he was? The rest of the week passed in a blur. Ryan still hadn't shown up. His friends didn't bother Nathan anymore. The stares faded a little. The whispers got quieter. But something still hung in the air. Nathan could feel it. One afternoon, as he was leaving the gym, Coach Parker called him over. Got a minute? Nathan hesitated. He wasn't in the mood for a lecture, but something in the coach's tone made him stop. They walked outside, standing near the track, where the football team was finishing practice. I heard what happened, Coach Parker said, arms crossed. Figured you had your reasons. Nathan nodded, not saying anything. Coach studied him for a moment, You a fighter? Nathan shrugged. Been boxing since I was a kid. Coach let out a low whistle. Yeah, that much was obvious. You're good. Then his expression shifted, turning serious. But let me ask you something. Did that fight change anything? Nathan frowned. What do you mean? Coach tilted his head toward the field. You think Ryan learned something? Think the rest of them did? Nathan exhaled, running a hand over his face. He knew the answer. Ryan wasn't the type to reflect. And as for the others, some respected him now, some feared him, and some would always see him the way they wanted to, no matter what he did. Coach nodded like he could see the thoughts running through Nathan's head. Thing is, people like Ryan, they don't really lose, not in a way that sticks. Nathan glanced at him, confused. Coach continued. He'll come back, he'll run his mouth, and the cycle starts again. But you? You're different. You have control. Nathan crossed his arms. What are you saying? Coach gestured toward the field. I've been telling the wrestling coach to send me a few kids. You ever thought about putting all that skill to better use? Nathan blinked. Wrestling? Coach grinned. Look, I know you can handle yourself. That much is obvious. But there's a difference between winning a fight and learning how to own your power. His expression darkened slightly. I've seen too many kids like you get boxed into a reputation they never wanted. Nathan didn't say anything. Coach clapped a hand on his shoulder. You already proved you're not to be messed with. Now prove there's more to you than that. That night, Nathan sat on his bed, staring at his uncle's old boxing gloves. He thought about all the times he had held back, all the times he had walked away, and the one time he hadn't. Coach was right. Ryan wouldn't change. People would think what they wanted. But Nathan still had a choice. And maybe, just maybe, this time he'd make a different one. Nathan had thought the fight was over. He had thought that one punch would end things. But Blackwood didn't work like that. It started small, a shift in the way people looked at him. Some of them still stared, but not in the same way they had before. This wasn't curiosity anymore. This was something else. Respect, fear, and something darker. Ryan still hadn't come back to school. No texts, no rumors, just nothing, like he had disappeared. And that was worse than any whisper. Nathan wasn't stupid. He had seen fights before. A busted lip, a bruised ego, and then the guy would come back, pissed off but still standing. That's how this worked. But Ryan wasn't back, and that meant something wasn't right. The feelings started creeping in, slow at first, then all at once. At night, when Nathan lay in bed, he swore he heard things moving outside his window. A shadow shifting just outside the edge of his vision. When he walked home, the streetlights flickered. Sometimes they went out completely. And the whispers? They didn't stop. They got louder. But now, they weren't coming from students. They were coming from places no one was standing. Nathan tried to tell himself it was nothing, that it was just in his head. But then, on Friday night, something happened that made it impossible to ignore. He was walking home from the gym when he saw it. The black truck, parked at the edge of the lot, the headlights off, engine running. Nathan felt his pulse pick up. He knew that truck. It was Ryan's. He stepped forward. 1 step, 2. The driver's side door opened. Nathan tensed. Ryan stepped out. But something was wrong. His posture, the way he moved. His face was hidden in the shadows, but even from a distance, Nathan could feel it. That wrongness. Ryan lifted his head slowly and smiled. Nathan's stomach turned to ice. Something wasn't right. Ryan shouldn't be standing like that. Shouldn't be smiling like that. Nathan swallowed. Ryan? Ryan didn't answer. He just took a step forward. Then another. Nathan took an instinctive step back. Something about the way Ryan was moving wasn't human. Then Ryan spoke, but it wasn't his voice. It was too low, too distorted. You should have walked away, Carter. Nathan's chest tightened. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he asked. Ryan grinned wider, and that's when Nathan saw it. The thing standing just behind him. Tall, too tall, a shadow that stretched unnaturally, shifting at the edges, like it wasn't fully in this world. Nathan's breath locked in his throat, his muscles tensed, his heartbeat hammering so loud it drowned out every other sound. Ryan took another step forward, and the shadow moved with him. Nathan ran. He didn't think, didn't stop, didn't dare look back. He sprinted down the street, heart slamming against his ribs. His house was only 2 blocks away. 1 block. The streetlight above him flickered, then shattered. Half a block. His porch. His hands fumbled for the keys. Footsteps behind him. Nathan slammed the door shut and locked it. The house was silent. No footsteps, no whispers, just silence. He pressed his back against the door, chest rising and falling. His hands were shaking. He reached for his phone. His fingers hovered over Coach Parker's number. Then, his phone screen glitched. Just for a second. A flicker. And in the reflection of the black screen, he saw it. A figure standing in the hallway behind him. Nathan whirled around. Nothing. Just the empty hallway. But he knew what he had seen. His breathing slowed. His heartbeat steadied. And in that moment, he made a decision. This wasn't about Ryan anymore. This was about survival. Coach Parker had told him to join the wrestling team, to use his strength for something real. Nathan knew now, this wasn't just about strength. This was about learning how to fight the right way. Because whatever had taken Ryan, it was coming for him next. Nathan didn't sleep that night. Not really. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the thing standing behind Ryan. That twisted, shifting shadow that didn't belong in this world. Every sound in the house made his heart jump. The creak of the floorboards, the faint rustling outside his window, the way the wind seemed to whisper his name. By morning, he had made up his mind. He couldn't just wait for whatever this was to come for him. He had to be ready. At school, things felt off. Ryan still hadn't returned. His friends, Nick, Kyle, the others, they weren't avoiding Nathan anymore. They were avoiding something else. The way they looked over their shoulders, the way their voices dropped to murmurs when they thought no one was listening. Nathan caught pieces of it in passing. "Did you hear about the Mitchells? His dad called the cops, but nobody's seen him since Friday." Nathan didn't ask. He didn't need to. He already knew. Ryan wasn't coming back, at least not as himself. That afternoon, Nathan walked into the wrestling gym. Coach Parker was sitting on the edge of the mat, watching a few guys sparring. When he noticed Nathan, he gave a knowing nod, like he had been expecting him. "Changed your mind?" Coach asked. Nathan hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah." Coach studied him for a moment, then stood. "Good. Get on the mat." Nathan didn't argue. The second his feet hit the mat, his instincts kicked in. The first guy they put him against, a junior, bigger, stronger, tried to overpower him right away. Nathan didn't let him. He wasn't just strong. He was fast, precise, controlled. By the end of the match, the guy was flat on his back, gasping for air. Coach Parker grinned. "You've got something, Carter." Nathan wiped sweat from his brow. "I know how to fight." Coach nodded. "Yeah, I can see that. But knowing how to fight and knowing how to win? That's different." Nathan met his gaze. "And wrestling teaches me how to win?" Coach's expression darkened slightly. "Wrestling teaches you how to control the fight." Nathan didn't reply. Because that was it. That was the answer. Whatever was happening in Blackwood, he couldn't punch his way out of it. This wasn't about being stronger than Ryan. It was about being smarter, faster, ready. That night, Nathan walked home alone. The street was too quiet. The streetlights buzzed overhead, flickering. His hands curled into fists at his sides. Every nerve in his body told him he was being watched. And then, a whisper, right behind him. Nathan whirled around. Nothing. just the empty sidewalk. But when he turned back, Ryan was standing at the end of the block. Nathan's pulse spiked. Not Ryan, not anymore. Ryan's eyes were wrong, black at the edges like ink bleeding into the whites. His skin looked stretched too tight, his grin unnatural. Nathan's stomach turned to ice. "You ready for round two?" Ryan's voice was warped, layered, something else speaking through him. Nathan took a slow step forward. And for the first time since the fight, he wasn't afraid. This wasn't about a fight anymore. This was about finishing it. Ryan's head tilted slightly, as if sensing the change. Nathan exhaled. Steady, controlled. A lion doesn't flinch when the hyenas bark. Nathan lifted his hands and waited. Because this time, he was ready.